I'll be going through the answers quickly, so make sure your course book is open in front of you, and please stop and rewind the video as you need to. So, got your book open in front of you? Are your answers in capitals? Want to know why the answers are the answers? Then let's go. Okay, we've got a few bits of underlining here to give you a clue of the kind of words that you've got to pay attention to when you're doing these exercises. And as always, as I always say, it's great to read around to identify language patterns and to have a look at the context to work out exactly what kind of word, what kind of message the word that you choose has got to communicate. If we have a look at, for number one, two things, we can see these two things here. First of all, the context suggests that we need to emphasize, or choose a word of emphasis. And secondly, we've got the language pattern, which is the word that's underlined, which is that. So we've got to choose an emphatic word that collocates or uses that. What's the answer we're looking for? So, it was so funny that ... For question number two, we've got to choose the preposition which introduces the expression that follows. And of course the preposition is on. Laughing out loud on a number of occasions. Question number three, as you can see, the word before and the word after have been underlined, which tells you that you really need to pay attention to the language structure in order to get the correct answer. And of course, the language structure is after managed, we need a full infinitive. So here the answer is to. For question number four, in order to get this correct, you have to have a look at the whole sentence structure, which of course involves question number five as well. If you have a look at the sentence structure, you'll identify that we've got a subordinate clause followed by a main clause, which means that you've got to work out what the relationship is between the subordinate clause and the main clause. And the word at the beginning of the subordinate clause very often tells us what that relationship is. Here, the context tells us that we need to create a relationship of contrast, which means that the subordinate conjunction that we choose has got to be one that introduces a contrast. And we've got an option of two here. We've got although and we've got though. Just before we go on to the next question, I just want to clear up a point very quickly. You're probably wondering why the answer is only although and though and not while or whilst, because very often, as I'm sure you've met before when we're doing these open-close questions, sometimes you can have one of the four options as a contrast subordinate conjunction. My advice would be this. First of all, get onto the internet now or consult a good grammar book and find out what the difference is between although and though and while and whilst. Some people will say there's no difference, some people will point to a subtle difference, but it's important that you do the reading and the research to find out why. Secondly, I would say this, because there is a danger that choosing while or whilst may be incorrect. It's always better to play safe, and in this case, when you need to think of a contrast subordinate conjunction, to think of although. If you go with although in the right context, you'll never get the answer wrong, whereas that if you go with while or whilst, there is a danger someone will mark you down. For question number five, what we need here is the correct relative pronoun which connects the idea before with the idea that immediately follows. If we actually have a look a little bit further on in the sentence, we've got an example right there. We've got the relative pronoun where, which refers to something else. So that's a little clue that you can always look out for. Here we've got to choose a relative pronoun that connects to the idea of day. Well, you've got a choice of two relative pronouns which can connect with the idea of a day, and that is what or which. For question 6, once again, we've got to be very aware of the context. What the message here is that ironing is easy. But we're presented with the language structure in such a way which is rather telling us the opposite. It's telling us it's difficult, unless we introduce the negative. So here, that's exactly what we've got to do, not. Something that's not at all difficult. In other words, easy. For question number 7, Nasty little tricky questions, these ones. I'm not going to go into the grammar points, you can go ahead and research this yourself, but we're basically looking for the preposition which refers not to the relative pronoun and what comes next, but what came before. In other words, the correct order. And if we think about that, we know that the preposition is going to be in the correct order. But given the language structure that we're presented with, it might cause you to go down the wrong path. But here, the answer is the correct order in which you iron ... For question number 8, in order to get the answer right, once again we have to turn back to context, and that is that this is a discussion about the correct materials with which to build your feather duster. Fascinating stuff. Well, here, of course, given the preposition and the language structure that we're presented with, the answer is, of course, made. Made from ostrich feathers and not synthetic.